Let's kick it off to nobody.
Yeah, see how it goes. Give it like 5-10 minutes or something.
Yeah, I mean, if after 10 minutes, no, we can say, oh, look at that, Dan's here. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
Hold on, I'm muted. Try again.
I can hear you. Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Volume.
Yeah, I think max out the volume. Hopefully that's loud enough. All right.
So where are you guys at now?
We're in
New York?
Vienna. Yeah,
Nice.
just for the until Saturday, and we're flying back. So Todd just got out here though, so we were meeting with a few teams, and yeah, I've been out here almost 2 weeks though, so I'm pretty exhausted and ready to head home.
It hits that point where you're like, Europe is nice, and then I want to go home.
Yeah, yep. So definitely looking forward to that. Yeah. Lars, I think I've seen you before. Are you from DevCycle? Am I getting that right? eBay. That's right. That's what it is. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, but yeah. So first meeting for me, so I don't know what to expect. Yeah, I'm a Java developer basically. So I'm a backend developer, but Java is my main language for now over 20 years. So hope to be able to contribute to OpenFeature.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, just to, I guess, set a little bit of context, we'll see where a kind of conversation goes today. But this meeting typically is focused on just like the Kubernetes and the flag D portions of it. And then the other meeting is the one that's specific for like the broad, you know, I guess open feature topics. So you know, we may have time to address any potential, you know, questions that you have. But that's typically, you know, what we talk about most of the time for these particular meetings.
You're gonna be scribe.
Yeah, I'll my battery's about to die, but I'll do my best to scribe.
We could also just copy it down after if you want to use it.
Yeah, so I might just do pen and paper. So
okay, yeah, I'm not even sure if we'll get that far, Daniel. We'll see how far the conversation goes. But I'm not sure how long we'll go for. So we don't actually have an agenda, so I'll just rely on people to bring things up. The only thing I can think of starting, I guess that might be worth starting with is there's been a decent amount of work done in flag D, especially since the last meeting. So I can summarize that at a really high level. And that will segue into, I guess, the one thing that I was thinking of talking about. So in summary, we have implemented a basic JSON evaluator so that the flags are stored in a specific format in which is itself maintained in a schemas repository, which also previously contained our APIs, Open API specification for flag D. And in addition to defining static flags in a way that's you know going to be familiar to you if you're familiar with pretty much any feature flagging system. It doesn't look, it looks like you'd expect. There's variants and a default variant and basically an enum specifying if the flag is enabled or disabled. We only made it an enum because we wanted to support additional possible options later without having to break the contract. And then most recently, we added rules, which are defined via JSON logic into that schema. So basically now you can do what I would consider to be like a really basic definition of a flag, including dynamic evaluation, just by defining a proper JSON structure. And last week at the bigger sync, I demoed that end to end with the operator, just deploying it and using it to power our playground app, which you guys may remember. And I did a similar demo today internally at Dynatrace that also included rule-based evaluation, which again only got merged a couple days ago. So that's kind of where we're at now. One thing I think I'd like to see happen relatively soon is gRPC service implementation. So right now we have HTTP as a service implementation, and I would like to see kind of a similar thing in gRPC, just to reduce all the overhead associated with HTTP. I mean, there's ways we can improve even the HTTP transport using like persistent connections and stuff like that, but HTTP is always going to be a bit slower, and it doesn't support bidirectional. So eventually, when we want events to fire, if the configuration changes, HTTP is not really a great way to do that. So I'd like to see that done eventually. And one other actually somewhat related thing. So Alex, initially in your implementation, there was a socket implementation. We kind of took that away as we added some additional interfaces and abstractions, but I'm thinking now it would be no problem to add it back now, to add something like that if we wanted to. So I don't know how you feel about having a socket implementation still that would probably just dump all the flags or take a certain interface and or take certain parameters to like maybe it could take a string identifier for a flag and just send back that flag as a JSON object. I don't know if you still see that as valuable or not, but that's something I think we could add back if we felt like it, if you thought it was important.
I think we could make it so that each buffer write from the socket returns the payload body of what the JSON object would be from the HTTP RESTful protocol. So you can kind of just mirror that, right? Because it's just a decapsulated version of that. So I think it would be interesting to do, but the greater reason was that you could use the same socket for HTTP as well, right? You could have a socket client and you could then do HTTP transport on top of it, which would just mean we could do a bit of reuse inside of the application. I don't think it's worth doing unless there's actually a need for it, right? Unless we're going to build an end-to-end example, which could be cool. I do think we should have a conversation about the examples we have, because we've got the kind of HTTP sidecar example. But if we wanted to showcase FlagD as a multi-level service, multiple service levels, I do think that could be an idea, right? We say, okay, well, we're going to pick either socket, we're going to pick RPC, and we're going to design an end-to-end demo with the implementation so that people can really get what this is all about. And also now, as just a brief update, I did a lot of work on the operator side, OpenFeature operator, that now supports multiple service providers. There's some work to be done on passing credentials and API URIs through, but in theory, the default service provider is now FlagD, and that's checked, that's validated what the service provider is, but we can now add service providers like Flagsmith, LaunchDarkly, et cetera, et cetera. And then what would happen is that on the back end, it would do a dynamic resolve based on the FlagD input arguments to the flag provider. So I actually think that might be a better route of being our next thing to do, but I don't know who is ready to work with us on that yet.
Can you help me understand that one a little bit? What's like the order of resolving it? One of the things I worry about with multiple providers is it can get abstracted from an end user. So if the flag isn't in one of, like, you can end up in a weird case where you don't know where the value is coming from.
So to me, it's exactly the same as a server-side implementation. The context, the FlagD provider, for example, that we have passes all the same information to FlagD that is available in the SDK. So it passes any user context. It passes all of the same objects across the wire via the REST protocol. So it doesn't, the parameters you have and the context you have is exactly the same as what you have in any like server-side evaluation, for example.
Okay, but so at the end of the day, you're still only loading one service provider when it's up and running, right? Like,
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I can briefly just walk us through how this implementation works. So FlagD at the moment has this abstraction layer for service providers. It also has sync providers. Syncs. This is actually a different sync provider. The service provider is the service that FlagD offers outwards, right? So that's HTTP only at the moment. We're talking about REST. We're talking about gRPC as well, etc. However, the sync provider, which is the internal naming we're calling this, is where it gets its data from, right? So what would happen is that the Kubernetes operator, so this could be a vendor, what happens is when FlagD gets created on the host by the Kubernetes operator, it just effectively is starting it with new arguments, right? So it's FlagD start sync provider equals, and then what would happen is we also have some additional parameters that get passed through, such as credential path. I'm thinking we actually store this, we actually put the secret from K8S on the disk, so we never have to read it in plain text. We just let that get read by the program FlagD only, or set it as an environmental variable, we can decide. And then the other thing, of course, we can set is something like the RESTful endpoint, right? I think most providers come down on a pretty similar set of credentials and configuration. And then what would happen is that rather than using the injected config map that we currently use at the moment, like that, where we update it and sort of the K8S layer, if you will, manages that, we let the provider manage it. So you can manage that through your UI. So I can go to one of my flagging ISVs and click on or off in my UI, and suddenly now I'm affecting what's happening inside the pod. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm still just trying to think through it from like, I know we've circled it a few times, just that normally we live in the application layer, and I'm trying to see of what this is offering for the end customer. That
Sure.
there.
So if that application is like a Flask server, right? And that Flask server here has a like, you know, pet shop kind of thing, and then or whatever, and then this can return back, and then of course just your normal kind of flagging situation where inside the host application it calls the client library for FlagD. Or in fact, this, I think, Todd, in your implementation, you don't have a client library, do you? Right? You just use RESTful.
So I think part of the confusion though is in like actually a lot of the feature flag vendors, they do flag evaluation inside like basically the host application in this context. So
yes, we offload that, right?
Right, but I mean, the question I guess would be, is there a need? You know, to some extent it made sense in FlagD because then, you know, that's just kind of part of this particular architecture and it worked well in the Kubernetes world. But like, if you're already using LaunchDarkly, for example, to move it to a separate process may not, you know, buy you much.
Yeah,
And
the reason why I think, and Doug from LaunchDarkly was somewhat excited about it. I don't know if it's the right solution for everybody, like especially in a K8S world. Like I think, you know, using the config map injected version is probably what we're going to see mostly. But I think this is worth POCing because I think specifically the use case that that I think was interesting to Doug, I don't want to speak too much on his behalf, was that, like I think Alex is getting at, it allows the layer that is written in your application code to be extremely thin. So all you're doing in application in the native application language, like maybe your application is written in Erlang, like something incredibly, maybe it's Miranda. All you need to do is be able to basically communicate over a socket, and then there's no need to have a flag or to have a LaunchDarkly SDK made for that language. So,
yeah, so my original implementation was in C for this, and I just did a RESTful call over a socket to FlagD.
And for the additional languages, then it makes sense. I guess like originally, you know, it was definitely more exciting with the different architectures. I know that that's really is a blocker now also itself, because it's the end provider would still have to support that architecture. But yeah, I could see a limited use case of this for those other languages that don't have support, some of the really esoteric ones.
Yeah, I think that's one use case. Another one is like, if you think of what's happening here, we're moving the decision about their feature flagging implementation out of app code and therefore maybe a little bit away from the developer and towards the operations person, right? So like the person maintaining the cluster is actually making decisions about how this flag is evaluated. Maybe they're aggregating multiple flag evaluation systems and abstracting them all in flag D. The actual application author doesn't have to concern himself with any of that.
Well, you also then, sorry, you go.
Sorry, I was going to say, well, the abstracting of multiple ones is definitely a question I have, because as a service provider, at the end of the day, you know, we're there to provide a good value. If you're now combining multiple providers in your code bases, it gets kind of complicated in how is it getting supported. If something goes wrong, is it actually launched darkly? Is it Flagsmith? Is it Flag D? Which one of these providers is causing the issue?
And I'm not necessarily suggesting that people would build an architecture like that. What I can tell you is that right now at Dynatrace, we already have that problem. It's already a problem for us because we have multiple feature flag source of truth even in our in-house implementations. So starting to be able to unify them behind a single abstraction at least helps us move towards finding a solution to that problem. I don't necessarily see it as a target as much as it's kind of a reality for some people. And then so it does help in that regard.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Alex, was there a point that you didn't get to finish making that you wanted to?
Yeah, I was just going to make that this is opening up a new market for these flagging providers who traditionally have been aiming towards application developers, right? And maybe even product folks who want to do A/B testing. This now lets you create flags that control operators inside of Kubernetes clusters, right? So you can do infrastructure flagging, turning off load balancers. There's nothing quite like that exists currently. So I think there's quite an exciting opportunity here to be leveraged.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually, too, Alex. Who is it? Somebody asked this last week. I don't know if you were there or if your head's just in the same place. Yeah, somebody asked they were like, hey, could we do routing decisions in Nginx based on this concept, based on Flag D? And the answer is absolutely you could. Like you can write custom extensions to Nginx with Lua. So you could write a Lua extension that would call Flag D to do an evaluation and then make routing decisions in real time based on that. And that's definitely more in the infrastructure category for sure.
It's interesting because I was just going to say, I was also looking at using like a WASM filter on Flag D that could do resolution based on incoming arguments. And that's something else we can do. And I know we've talked about using Q as an evaluation, sort of DSL as well. So there's a lot of ways you can build that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I do think these will help with the learning overall. We do have some customers using us with Nginx today. I actually know of one customer that instead of using the HPA, actually uses launch directly because it's more limited, but those are much more one-offs versus industry kind of concepts. So hopefully we can kind of move it in the operational direction.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I just want to reiterate, like to your original point, Dan, the using a vendor in Flag D is a valid use case, but I think it's probably not a primary use case, right? Like I think the primary use case of Flag D is going to be reading the config maps, but I think that it's certainly, but because we're kind of already almost there, because we have all the abstractions, because we have the Golang SDK and we're going to have Golang providers, I think it makes sense to be able to POC it, and it makes sense to be able to see it working. And I think as we work on it, we're going to see more use cases that are valid and interesting, and again, move us towards the operational aspect of things.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to bring it up, I had the conversation around it to make sure we at least had the conversation, and no, it sounds good to me.
Yeah, I do. It does make sense. So I don't think it's likely to have like some Java application call through Flag D to call the launch directly Java SDK. It just doesn't really make sense. But so yeah.
I think there's some use cases, but they're not the primary use case. Like I said, I would expect that 90% of Flag D deployments are probably going to be reading a config, but that could change because I think this could be a potentially powerful concept. So
I had a few thoughts around that. Maybe, I don't know, it's a good thing to mention now, or put on the agenda at some point, that is to open up other ways that Flag D can have more dynamic updates. And one of them is to read the API server directly. So to have an event stream on the API server, and then we actually put the data into etcd, and we do that through primitives, right? So we can kind of cut out the middleman. I mean, it's actually the same thing if you think about it, other than having to mount the volume and then have to read the path. We're cutting that out and going straight to the server. So I think that might be the next evolution of the sync, is to have an API server sync.
Yeah, that actually, I'm assuming that would probably cut down on kind of, suppose the latency almost of the updates. I don't know if you've gone through the demo, but it takes about a minute sometimes to like the reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, there will definitely be use cases where it's not possible. Like I know it, working at JP and Amex, those sort of places, you're never going to be given permission in a tenant namespace to read off the API server, because there's also a QoS issue, right? You can hammer it, but there is certainly a bunch of folks who don't care about that. So you could have set that, and maybe that could even be the default. It would definitely be much quicker, because we could
even beyond quality of service. I suppose there'd be like general permissions issues.
The service account permissions would need to be more extensive.
Yeah, but that makes sense. It's still a really interesting point. It makes sense to me. Speaking of the reconciliation time, we had an issue to add an annotation to our workloads, like that would represent the hash. I don't know if that ever got actioned. Did we?
That was to check to see if the hash had changed. I thought I did that. That's in the operator.
Maybe you did, and maybe I just wasn't involved in the PR.
I can check that. So that would be in the mutating the webhook, right?
Yeah, it's possible I just didn't see it. Maybe it was a day that a couple of days I wasn't working or something.
I'll have a check.
Yeah. I mean, those are all the things I think I wanted to talk about. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to bring up, but those were the things I want to mention.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I'm not sure if it is in there. What was it? Was to store the SHA of the the integrity check of the payload, so you didn't have to run it through the validator, right? If it had already been validated.
There's a couple things. It was to not run because you said that the reconciliation loop would run occasionally when there was no changes.
Yeah.
Occasionally as a no-op, and then sometimes when there was no changes to the actual flag spec. So in those cases, we didn't want to do any reconciliation of the actual config maps. But the other thing was that we were going to, as part of that, add that same SHA to an annotation on the actual workload on the deployment itself, which, if I understand correctly, adding an annotation to a workload hypothetically should decrease the propagation time in updating the config map. So it hypothetically should just make things quicker, was my understanding.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't get around to doing it. I'll add an issue to do it.
I think there might be an issue already that was there. I could be wrong. I think it might have been assigned to me at some point and then assigned to you. I think it's in the operator.
Yeah, there is provider awareness at CR level.
No, it wouldn't be that one.
In fact, that one's done.
Yeah, it says improve reconciliation. Only up to, it's this one. It's assigned to both of us. It's 20, issue 20.
Yeah, I can take it. I think it'd be a very quick change. I think I might actually have it stashed on a branch.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me because I think you mentioned that you'd actually done it, and I just think maybe it never got into a PR.
Yeah, so it just does like a checksum. Yeah. And then I put it on I store it on the config map itself, and on the store it on the feature flag configuration, right? Yeah, store it on the feature flag configuration, and then inject it with the config map into the deployment, or on the deployment. Yeah. That's a bit trickier because we don't own the deployments, right? We don't have an owner reference on those deployments, so we have to scan. I mean, it's fine, but it's just as you scale the cluster out, that becomes quite intensive, scanning every deployment in every namespace for that annotation or for those labels.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's not something we want to do. Maybe if the only reason to do that is to lower the reconciliation time, maybe it's not something that's worth doing. I'm not personally of the opinion that we need to have flag values be propagated faster than a minute. I don't know if other people disagree. Like, I think if you do need that, maybe you should again consider a vendor.
I think we definitely, I want to aim to try and lower it as much as we can, because that is quite slow, but let's just see. I mean, I was seeing 30 seconds when I was doing direct.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on when you do it. You can hit it just wrong and it takes about a minute. Where it becomes slightly annoying is if you have multiple pods, you can see it basically slowly roll out, and that's
Well-
what becomes a bummer. Like a minute's no big deal, but if it's 10 seconds between,
Thomas did add some code in I wasn't super sure about, which does this back off retry in the operator. Actually, it does a exponential back off. So it might be that we're hitting one of those and it's increasing the retry loops. So I'll check it later on.
Yeah, when I like it just as an experiment, I added a whole bunch of replicas to our workload, and it's interesting what the delta is. So, and maybe it does have to do with that backoff retry, because it seems like there could be a fairly large delta between the first workload having its config map be updated and the last one. But again, I'm not convinced any of this is like a huge deal breaker for
I think we're getting to a point where we actually need some user feedback as well on this stuff, to really decide that.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
What's the timeline? I mean, I haven't attended some of the other meetings, but what's the timeline on sandboxing?
Oh, how do you mean?
So has it been accepted yet, the sandbox?
So, yes, yeah, I'm just filling out the paperwork now. I've been in Europe for 2 weeks, so it's slightly delayed, but when I get back, it's gonna be something I knock out. But yes, it has been accepted. And then when it comes to spec and some of the SDKs, we're pretty solidly in alpha now, and we have Java and .NET in a pretty good state right now. I think Go won't be too far behind.
Java and JavaScript.
Or Java, yeah, choose.
So I think maybe then from like the flag D perspective and the operator, we need to just really, really focus on KubeCon to get good examples, like more good end-to-end examples. And so maybe the thing we should do is harmonize on the next sync provider we end up building, or next service provider we end up exposing.
I mean, maybe something infrastructure could be really cool. I mean, that is just such a new concept to some extent, that it could be a pretty cool, proof of concept at a conference like KubeCon.
I mean, actually, maybe doing routing with Nginx is a good use case, because it's in Lua, and Lua is not an extremely popular language, and we could easily write a Lua provider that would just talk to flag D, and we could do some, like, maybe we could find some interesting routing.
I would like to write an admission controller that has flagging enabled to be able to turn on and off the ability to do cosign checking in Q, because I think cosign with SIG is a very hot topic, and I think Q is a very new language. So actually having a DSL you can mount as a config map that could be an alternative to just JSON might be interesting. So is it we could translate the schema spec to Q as well, because Q is a superset of JSON, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think like that whole I evaluator, I think it is the interface. So you can really plug it with anything. So you could easily implement a Q1, which might be more like cloud native than JSON, and maybe like more attractive. So I think we could plug in anything we want. Maybe it even becomes the new default.
I think it would definitely get a lot of interest, because Q is such an interesting language to people.
Yeah, I'd be excited to see that.
So just to kind of summarize that, it's the emission controller to toggle what exactly?
So for a KubeCon demo, or a demo generally, I think it'd be interesting to have the ability to show some sort of infrastructure capability. And so to do that, you could write an operator that has an admission controller. So, and what would happen is that it does what we do in some ways. It scans the pod spec, the object spec coming into the cluster. It looks at the image, and if you flag the feature on, it doesn't just look at the image, it checks that the image has the metadata of cosign, the public key, so GPG key. and then it validates that that is a signed image. It's a new, it's worth checking out. SIG Store is a project that has just been adopted by Kubernetes upstream.
Yeah.
So all the images now have the metadata that contains the public key of the GPG key.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is now you could then say only allow with a feature flag images that are signed, and we could demo that pretty easily.
Yeah, I can't wait till we can do signed Helm artifacts. I don't think that's a thing yet, but I could see how what you're talking about would be useful for.
That's coming from a lot of vendors very soon, actually.
Oh, that's great. But yeah, that sounds like a really cool demo, and I think like all of the subject matter around it seems really hot and interesting to talk about at KubeCon. So I like that idea a lot. Yeah.
Should I put an issue in the research repository or something like that, and we can talk about it more there?
Yeah, that'd probably be perfect. I think Dan has to drop. Was there anything else you wanted to add quickly?
Yeah, just before I drop off for what you're mentioning with Nginx, Todd, we'll want to check because I know one of the things we ran into was Lua can't make network calls. I don't think in the hot path. So definitely make sure it works for this. Yeah. So we ran into it because it's loaded locally in memory that it works there, but there are some kind of restrictions with the scripting.
Okay, that would make sense. You'd probably, yeah, they're probably heavily restricted actually. Well, it sounds like, I mean, maybe I'm not sure if Lua will allow you to do like if well, I'm not sure if a framework allows you to do in a different thread, like some kind of other. Maybe it can do some other kind of polling, but if it can't, then that's not an idea we have to implement. I mean, Alex's seems to kind of hit the mark in terms of a cool infrastructural hot topic anyway. So.
Okay, I'll write a quick issue up and we can take it offline and chat about it there.
Perfect. Cool.
I need to drop. Have a good one, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Lars, Joseph, have anything else specifically to add or any questions? I know it's probably a little off topic for you, Lars, compared to what you're probably expecting, but.
I think it's very, very interesting also to see where the journey is going. So also being open to completely different use cases than the usual one. So I really like this.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I think that's why we kind of split the meetings off too. It's like this can be very specific for some of this maybe infrastructure and like the flag D processes and kind of some new ideas there. And the other one's more around like the spec itself and kind of defining that all out. So both are progressing pretty nicely, but they're pretty distinct topics.
What about the logo situation?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, that's a good point. I like have been. I've had that on my brain for a while. I gotta say, I really like your idea of doing like a contest. I would be down for that. I don't know. It would be cool to have some kind of half decent prize, but yeah, I don't know. Alex is going to personally build and ship someone like a Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster.
Hey, you know what? It's funny. I've actually got one ready to go.
I got one right here on my desk.
I got one for next KubeCon. Yeah.
Will you sign it for someone?
I've actually got a couple of those just hanging around. But yeah, I think to your point, it is hard to find a good prize that's not going to cost huge amounts of money. Maybe we could get it sponsored or something. I don't know.
Somebody had mentioned that internally. Like I don't know. We could put some feelers out in Dynatrace and see if it's possible. I mean, it seems like
I mean, as long as it's not insanely expensive, just kind of a and part of it.
Well, I was thinking like Lego or something, right? Like not
exactly.
nothing more than like $100. Right?
They do something kind of fun and it could get people excited and interested. And yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, we could start there. If it's a flop, then we make our own logo. So I'll take that as an action item then and see what we can do on our side. If you know anyone at Canonical that feels like getting involved too, certainly let me know. But it probably isn't too difficult to find, someone to sponsor a $50 prize or something. And
oh yeah, I don't think that would be too hard.
Yeah, if anything, I think the more difficult thing would be, trying to making sure that we have enough participation within the community, and that there's also like even outside of our community so far, it'll be a good opportunity to involve new people also.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, the ultimate prize I can think of would be like virtual or some sort of conference ticket or something like that. We get loads, but unfortunately we're going to use them because we send like 30 people every year. But I'm just trying to think what we get for free as sponsors that we can give to people that they might enjoy, you know.
It could be VIP access to the open feature party at KubeCon.
Yeah, open feature swag. There you go.
I have stickers
Print
here,
some on
so
those t-shirts.
I can send them some stickers. So yeah, let's think about that. I think that would be kind of fun. Like, why not? We can give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, you know, no loss there really.
Yeah,
So
maybe we could have something by next week community meeting, and then
that would be my goal. Yeah, if I could have something kind of prepared, we could mention it there and try to build some buzz around it, try to get some people. I think we also probably want to create an issue for that then, so we can basically say like, here's some ideas, kind of the requirements and whatever, and we can link to that
we can
issue.
put it in community maybe, or wherever
So
it makes sense.
Alex, do you know if there's any like precedents for that anywhere? Like, have you seen this elsewhere? We could maybe just kind of see, you know, because there's probably some kind of like legal disclaimers and stuff we would have to make sure we add in
So
there.
for what?
For like running a, like, I don't know, a open source contest of some sort, like,
You know, the more I spend time in these communities, the more I realize it's sort of the ask forgiveness model. You know, people just do what they want.
Yeah,
People just do what they want, and like they sometimes get reprimanded. No, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I'm sure it's no big deal.
I guess the only thing that we could be, you know, when we set up the thing is that it's going to belong to OpenFeature at the end of it, right?
Well, it's actually the Linux Foundation.
The
now,
Linux,
so
yeah, the
like,
CNCF technically.
we'll have to just make sure that
I would make the thing a Google form, right? You attach it and you just say at the beginning of the form, please, this is the agreement, this is the license, just so you know, and you know, just link to the contributor covenant that people are expecting, because we've got that in now as well, don't we?
Yeah. And that's probably also another reason to keep the prize money low, or not money, but like of low value. Otherwise you probably get into weird like tax and other issues that I don't feel like dealing with. So yeah, no, I think that's cool. It'd be fun to get people involved in that. Yeah. All right. Any other topics we should chat about? Perfect. I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up. All right. Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Later.